Jade Ellis stepped into Le Papillon, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble floors. The restaurant buzzed with the quiet hum of conversation, the soft clinking of wine glasses, and gentle music playing in the background. The dim lighting gave the place a warm, intimate feel, one that Jade had always admired. But tonight, a sense of unease gnawed at her. She had arrived earlier than her husband, Nathan, who was finishing up a meeting across town. He'd insisted she go ahead and order without him, but now, sitting alone at a corner table, she wasn't sure if that had been the best idea. Jade glanced around at the other patrons, elegant and well-dressed, their laughter and chatter blending with the smooth jazz drifting from the speakers. As she adjusted her chair, a waiter approached. He was tall, blonde, and wore the restaurant's sharp black and white uniform. His name tag read Liam. Unlike the usual warmth she'd come to expect at Le Papillon, Liam barely made eye contact, his expression cold and indifferent. "Are you ready to order?" he asked flatly, without a smile. Jade blinked, taken aback by his abruptness. She glanced at the empty table in front of her. "Could I just get some water for now? I'll order in a bit." Liam scribbled something down without so much as a nod. "Sure," he said, then turned and walked away without another word. Jade watched him go, noticing how quickly he moved to another table across the room. The couple seated there, a middle-aged pair dressed in designer clothes, were greeted with a broad smile and a laugh as Liam refilled their wine glasses. He chatted with them for a moment before moving on, his demeanor entirely different from how he'd treated her. Jade frowned, trying to shake off the uncomfortable feeling. Maybe he was just having a bad day. But as she sat there, waiting for her water, the unease grew. Minutes ticked by, and she watched Liam make his rounds to the other tables, always stopping to check on the diners, offering smiles and polite conversation. Yet he hadn't returned to her table once. She had been to Le Papillon countless times with Nathan, and the service had always been flawless. But tonight, alone, something felt off. She didn't want to overthink it, but the nagging feeling in her gut wouldn't go away. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Nathan. "Running a little late, love. Go ahead and order whatever you like. Be there soon." Jade quickly typed a response and set her phone down, glancing up to see Liam tending to a large group near the window. Her water still hadn't arrived. Crossing her arms, Jade narrowed her eyes, watching as Liam laughed and poured wine for the group. Not once had he even glanced her way. 5 more minutes passed, and still no water. Her frustration was growing. Something wasn't right. She glanced around the restaurant again, noticing how seamlessly the service flowed for everyone else but her. A knot of tension formed in her chest. Finally, she flagged down a passing waitress, a young woman named Elena, who had always been polite whenever she had served them before. "Excuse me," Jade said, her voice calm but firm. "I've been waiting for some water for a while now. Could you bring me a glass, please?" Elena blinked, her expression immediately apologetic. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'll bring it right away." She hurried off toward the bar. As Jade waited, she felt the weight of other diners' eyes briefly flicker toward her before they returned to their own conversations. The knot of tension tightened in her chest. It wasn't just about the water, it was something more, something she had encountered too many times before. Still, she pushed the thought aside, waiting for the service she knew she deserved. Elena returned with the water, and Jade thanked her quietly. But even as she took a sip, the cold water did little to ease her rising frustration. Whatever was going on tonight, it felt like more than just a bad day for a waiter. She watched Liam continue his rounds, moving from table to table with ease, pouring wine and engaging in light banter with the other patrons. His smile was warm and welcoming, except when it came to her. The more she watched, the more her initial unease solidified into something heavier. This wasn't just slow service. It felt deliberate. Her fingers tapped lightly against the edge of the glass as she considered her next move. Should she say something? Was she overreacting? She had been in enough situations like this to recognize that familiar doubt creeping in. Jade had learned to pick her battles, but tonight, the blatant difference in treatment gnawed at her. 20 more minutes passed, and still Liam hadn't returned to take her order. The restaurant was getting busier, but that didn't explain why he had completely ignored her table. At a nearby table, a new group had arrived, And within moments, Liam was there, taking their orders with the same charm and enthusiasm he had shown everyone else but her. Jade straightened in her chair and raised her hand, trying to catch his attention. Liam's eyes briefly flickered past her, but he made no acknowledgement. Instead, he turned his back and headed toward the kitchen. Her patience was wearing thin. Jade glanced at her phone, wondering how much longer Nathan would be. Her stomach growled, a reminder that she hadn't even placed her order yet. Taking a deep breath, she decided she wasn't going to sit quietly and be ignored anymore. As soon as Liam reappeared from the kitchen, she raised her hand again, this time making sure he couldn't miss her. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice firm. Liam paused and turned toward her with a blank expression. For a brief moment, Jade wondered if maybe she was overthinking things, but the look in his eyes as he approached her table made her doubt that hope. "What can I get you?" he asked flatly, without any trace of the warmth or enthusiasm he had shown to every other table. Jade felt her frustration bubbling up, but she kept her composure. "I'd like to place my order, please. I've been waiting for quite some time." Liam shrugged, his tone dismissive. "We've been busy." Jade's eyebrows lifted in disbelief. She glanced around the restaurant, watching how effortlessly Liam moved between other tables, never missing a beat. "Busy? Sure, but not too busy for everyone else." She kept her voice measured, not wanting to escalate things too quickly. "I've noticed you've been able to attend to the other tables without any issue. Is there a reason I've been sitting here for almost 30 minutes without even having my order taken?" Liam shifted on his feet, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Maybe you're just being sensitive." Jade's grip on her glass tightened, but she maintained her calm. She had heard this line before, accusations that her experiences were imagined, that her feelings were invalid. She wasn't about to let it slide. "Sensitive?" she repeated, her voice low but sharp. "I'm simply asking for the same service you're providing to everyone else in this restaurant. That's not being sensitive. That's asking for basic respect." Liam sighed, as if she were wasting his time. "Look, we're short-staffed, and there's a lot going on. I'll take your order, but if you're going to accuse me of—" "I'm not accusing you of anything," Jade interrupted, her voice steady. "I'm pointing out the difference in how you're treating me compared to everyone else, and I think you know exactly what I'm talking about." Liam's expression hardened, and he said nothing for a moment before pulling out his notepad. "What do you want to order?" he asked, the coldness in his voice unmistakable. Jade held his gaze, refusing to back down. "I'll have the house special," she said, her tone matching his. Liam scribbled something on his notepad and walked away without another word. Jade watched him go, her frustration now mixed with a deep sense of indignation. She had seen this behavior before, the subtle, almost invisible discrimination that so many tried to pretend didn't exist. But tonight, it was right in front of her, undeniable and infuriating. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly as she tried to calm herself. Her fingers tapped against her phone, resisting the urge to text Nathan. He'd be here soon enough. But even as she tried to focus on the food that was hopefully on its way, Jade couldn't shake the feeling that things were only going to get worse. This wasn't over. Jade sat in silence, her frustration simmering as the minutes ticked by. Liam hadn't returned since taking her order, and though the restaurant was bustling around her, she felt like she was in a bubble. Ignored, overlooked, and isolated in a place that should have made her feel welcome. She glanced at her watch. It had been nearly 45 minutes since Liam had jotted down her order. Still no food, no updates, and no sign of him. The soft clinking of plates and murmured conversations filled the air. At nearby tables, guests continued to be showered with attention as servers brought out dish after dish, their drinks constantly refilled. A sense of disbelief washed over her. How could someone in a place like this, where service was supposed to be impeccable, get away with this kind of behavior? Her patience had officially run out. She flagged down Elena, the waitress who had brought her water earlier. Elena approached quickly, concern etched on her face. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" Elena asked, her voice filled with genuine worry. Jade sighed, trying to keep her voice steady despite the growing anger. "I've been waiting over an hour. I ordered the house special, and I still haven't received any food. Could you check with the kitchen for me, please?" Elena's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, I'm so sorry. That's definitely not normal. Let me see what's going on." She hurried off toward the kitchen, leaving Jade to stew in her frustration. Jade clenched her jaw, watching as other tables received their meals without any issues, while she sat there, completely forgotten. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, but underneath that, a deeper emotion began to bubble up, something much closer to anger. This wasn't just bad service, it was intentional. A few minutes later, Elena returned, looking flustered and apologetic. "I checked with the kitchen," she began nervously, clutching the tray she was holding, "and they said they never received your order." Jade's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? How is that possible? Liam took my order almost an hour ago." Elena bit her lip, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "I'm really sorry, ma'am. It looks like he never put it in." Jade's pulse quickened, her frustration now boiling into full-blown anger. She stared past Elena toward the kitchen doors, where Liam had disappeared after taking her order. He had deliberately neglected her again. Jade stood up, her hands resting on the edge of the table. "Can you please get Liam to come over here?" she asked, her voice calm but with an edge sharp enough to cut through the tension. Elena nodded quickly and hurried off, clearly eager to avoid further confrontation. Jade watched her go, feeling the eyes of other diners briefly flick in her direction before turning back to their meals. She knew those looks. They were the kind that appeared when something uncomfortable was happening, but no one wanted to get involved. A minute later, Liam appeared, walking slowly toward her table with the same unreadable expression. He approached with a slight swagger, as if nothing were wrong at all. That's what infuriated her the most, the nonchalance, the audacity of his attitude. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice completely devoid of any genuine concern. Jade stared at him for a long moment, gathering herself. She didn't want to explode, not yet, but she was done being polite. "Yes, there's a problem. You never put my order in." Liam blinked, his face remaining expressionless. "I'm sure that's just a misunderstanding." Jade's eyes narrowed. "A misunderstanding? I've been sitting here for over an hour. You took my order, and now I find out you never even bothered to put it in? How is that a misunderstanding?" Liam shrugged, and Jade felt a surge of anger at his indifference. "Look, we're busy tonight. Mistakes happen." Jade's temper flared. "It wasn't a mistake. You've ignored me from the moment I walked in. You've given every other table exceptional service, but you can't even be bothered to give me the basic courtesy of taking my order. And now you're telling me it's just a mistake?" But Liam's eyes darkened, a flicker of something more dangerous crossing his face. He crossed his arms over his chest, his posture defensive. "If you're going to start accusing me of things, maybe you should just leave." Jade's breath caught, her anger now boiling over. "Accusing you? I'm pointing out exactly what's been happening all night. You've ignored me, treated me like I don't exist, while bending over backward for everyone else. This isn't about a mistake. This is about you thinking you can get away with treating me like this because I'm a black woman, sitting alone in this restaurant." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and heavy. The nearby tables had gone quiet, and Jade could feel the weight of the other diners' eyes on her. But she didn't care. She wasn't going to let him brush this off, not when it was so obvious what was really happening. Liam's face flushed red and he shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not going to stand here and let you accuse me of being a racist," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "If you don't like the service, maybe you should leave." Jade's fists clenched at her sides, her heart pounding. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "I'm paying to be here, just like everyone else. You're not kicking me out because you don't like being called out on your behavior." Just as Liam opened his mouth to respond, the restaurant door swung open. Jade's eyes shifted toward the entrance as Nathan strode in, his tall figure cutting a commanding presence as he made his way toward their table. Jade's breath caught, and for the first time that night, a sense of relief washed over her. Liam's face paled when he saw Nathan approaching, and his posture changed instantly. He stood a little straighter, his eyes flicking nervously between Jade and her husband, as if suddenly realizing just how badly he had messed up. Nathan reached their table, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp as they locked onto Liam. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with unmistakable authority. Jade remained silent for a moment, letting Liam squirm under Nathan's gaze. She could already see the fear creeping into Liam's expression. He didn't know who Nathan was, at least not yet. "Your waiter here," Jade said slowly, "has been ignoring me all night, never put in my order, and is now trying to kick me out because I called him out on his behavior." Nathan's eyes didn't leave Liam. "Is that so?" Liam opened his mouth, but no words came out. His face was ashen now, his earlier bravado completely gone. He finally seemed to realize who Nathan was, and Jade could practically see the gears turning in his head, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. But it was already too late. Liam stood frozen in place, his face pale as he stared at Nathan, the confidence and smug attitude he had displayed earlier evaporating in an instant. Jade leaned back in her chair, watching the shift in power play out right before her eyes. She didn't need to say anything more. Liam had just realized who he was dealing with, and there was no way out for him now. Nathan's gaze remained steady, his eyes never leaving Liam's face. He crossed his arms, his presence radiating quiet authority, though his tone remained calm and measured. "So," Nathan said, his voice low but carrying across the now silent section of the restaurant, "you've been ignoring my wife, have you?" Liam stammered, his words stumbling over themselves. No sir, I didn't, I wasn't." He glanced nervously around the room as if searching for someone to rescue him, but no one was coming to his aid. Every other diner had turned back to their own conversations, clearly eager to stay out of the unfolding drama. Nathan raised an eyebrow, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Liam's growing panic. "It certainly sounds like you've been giving her a hard time," he continued. "Ignoring her order, not providing basic service, and now, from what I just heard, you're trying to kick her out of my restaurant." Liam's face turned bright red, and he quickly shook his head. No, I didn't know, I didn't mean. You didn't know she was my wife?" Nathan finished for him, his voice sharp. Liam swallowed hard, clearly trying to regain some control over the situation. "I'm sorry, sir, I didn't realize, I didn't know she was." "Why should it matter who she is?" Nathan cut him off, his voice colder now, the edge of his frustration slipping through. "Do you treat all of your customers this way, or just the ones you think you can get away with disrespecting?" Jade stayed silent, letting Nathan handle the confrontation. She could see the fear in Liam's eyes now, his mind racing as he tried to find a way out of the situation. But there was no escape. He had made his choices, and now he was going to face the consequences. "I'm really sorry, sir. It wasn't like that, I promise. It was just a mistake. Things got busy and I—" Nathan's eyes narrowed. "Busy?" he repeated, his voice steady but firm. "You had plenty of time to attend to everyone else, didn't you? So what was the real issue here?" Liam's mouth opened but no words came out. He stood there, fumbling for a response, knowing full well that anything he said would only dig him deeper into the hole he had already created for himself. Jade spoke up, her voice calm but sharp. "It's not just about the service. You made a choice to ignore me, to treat me as less than every other customer here tonight. And when I called you out on it, you tried to turn it around and make it seem like I was the problem." Liam's eyes flickered toward her, but he quickly looked away, unable to meet her gaze. His entire demeanor had shifted, from smug arrogance to silent panic. Nathan uncrossed his arms and took a step closer to Liam, who visibly flinched. "Here's what's going to happen," Nathan said, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "You're going to go home for the night. We'll deal with this tomorrow. But understand one thing, there's no place for this kind of behavior in my restaurant." Liam nodded quickly, his face pale. "Yes, sir," he muttered, barely able to form the words. "Now go," Nathan ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. Liam didn't need to be told twice. He turned and practically fled toward the back of the restaurant, disappearing through the kitchen doors without a second glance. The tension in the air lingered, though the worst of it had passed. Slowly, the restaurant's noise resumed, and the patrons who had been eavesdropping returned to their meals and conversations, pretending they hadn't just witnessed the entire scene. Nathan turned back to Jade, his expression softening. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, reaching for her hand across the table. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle now, the anger from moments before completely gone. Jade exhaled, feeling the weight of the night lift off her shoulders. She squeezed his hand in return. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice was a little shaky. I couldn't believe how blatant he was." Nathan shook his head, his jaw tightening slightly. "Some people think they can get away with that kind of behavior. They forget that the world is changing." "I wasn't sure if I was going to say something at first," Jade admitted quietly, "but I knew I couldn't just let it slide." Nathan smiled softly, admiration in his eyes. "You did the right thing, and I'm glad you didn't let him push you around. No one should ever have to deal with that kind of disrespect." Jade nodded, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion wash over her. The confrontation had drained her more than she'd realized, but at the same time, she felt stronger for standing up for herself. Liam's behavior had been appalling, but in the end, he was the one who had to face the consequences, not her. "Thank you for stepping in when you did," Jade said, her voice soft. "I wasn't sure how far he was going to take it." Nathan squeezed her hand again, his eyes warm. "I'll always have your back, you know that." The tension that had filled the night slowly began to fade as they sat together, the world around them continuing as if nothing had happened. But Jade knew that what had transpired was important, a reminder that even in a place as polished and elegant as this restaurant, there were still those who carried their prejudices with them, whether they knew it or not. The rest of the evening passed quietly. Jade and Nathan shared a meal together, the earlier event still lingering in the back of their minds. But with no more drama, the restaurant continued its usual rhythm, oblivious to the significance of what had just happened. But Jade knew, and so did Nathan. The real conversation, the real reckoning, was still to come. Tomorrow, they would face Liam again, and this time, there would be no escape for him. The morning sun filtered gently through the blinds in Nathan's office, casting long shadows across the room. Jade sat in one of the leather chairs opposite Nathan's desk, her mind still replaying the events of the night before. Today wasn't just about seeking justice for herself. It was about setting a standard, ensuring that people like Liam understood that their actions had consequences. Nathan sat behind his desk, calm but serious. He flipped through a few documents, occasionally glancing up at Jade. "You sure you want to be here for this?" he asked, though he already knew her answer. "Absolutely," Jade replied firmly. "This isn't just about you or the restaurant. It's about the principal. He needs to hear it from both of us." Nathan nodded, understanding. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the street below, waiting. Jade could sense the tension in the air, thick and heavy, like the calm before a storm. A knock sounded at the door. Nathan turned and, with a deep breath, called out, "Come in." Liam shuffled in, looking like a shadow of the smug, arrogant waiter he had been the night before. He avoided their eyes, his steps hesitant. Jade noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he sat down, his usual bravado replaced by nervous uncertainty. "Morning," Nathan said, his tone flat. Liam swallowed and nodded, clearly anxious. "Morning, sir," he mumbled. Nathan didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We need to talk about last night," he said, his voice calm, but filled with authority. "You're aware of why you're here, right?" Liam nodded quickly, his eyes darting between Jade and Nathan. "Yes, sir. I know." "Good," Nathan continued, "because this isn't just about bad service. What happened last night was unacceptable in more ways than one. Do you have anything you want to say before we start?" Liam fidgeted in his seat, glancing at Jade but quickly looking away again. "I'm sorry for what happened, sir," he said quietly, though his words lacked conviction. "I didn't mean for it to come off like that." Nathan's eyes narrowed. "Come off like what exactly?" Liam fumbled with his words, his voice shaky. "I didn't mean to offend anyone. It wasn't personal. I was just busy, and things got away from me. I didn't know she was my wife." Nathan finished the sentence for him, his voice harder now. Liam nodded quickly, looking even more uncomfortable. "Yes, sir, if I'd known." Jade finally spoke up, her voice sharp and cutting. "If you'd known I was his wife, you would have treated me differently? Is that what you're saying?" Liam froze, realizing too late what he had implied. His eyes widened and he stammered, No, that's not what I meant. I just—" His words trailed off, unsure of how to dig himself out of the hole he had just created. Nathan leaned forward, his hands clasped in front of him on the desk. This isn't about whether or not you knew who she was. It's about how you treated her, and the fact that you thought you could get away with it because you assumed no one would care. Liam's face flushed red. I didn't mean. Stop. Nathan interrupted, his voice cold and final. We're not here to listen to your excuses. You disrespected my wife, and by extension this restaurant. You didn't just forget her order or make a mistake. You ignored her because you thought it didn't matter. But it does. Liam fell silent, his head hanging low. Jade watched him, her frustration simmering just below the surface. She had no pity for him, not after the way he had treated her. But she wasn't done yet. I want to hear the truth, Liam, Jade said, her voice steady. Why did you really act the way you did last night? What made you think it was okay to ignore me? To treat me like I didn't deserve the same respect as everyone else? Liam looked at her, his face pale. I wasn't trying to disrespect you. I didn't mean for it to seem that way. Jade raised an eyebrow. Didn't mean for it to seem that way? Liam, you didn't even take my order. You ignored me for over an hour while you attended to everyone else. You didn't even refill my water. How is that not intentional? Liam's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He looked at Nathan, hoping for a lifeline, but found none. Nathan remained silent, his expression stern. We're giving you one chance to tell the truth. Jade said, her voice firm. No more excuses. Liam swallowed hard, his throat bobbing as he struggled to find his voice. I didn't think you'd cause any trouble, he finally admitted, his words barely a whisper. Jade's eyes narrowed. Trouble? Because I'm black? And you figured no one would care how you treated me? Liam flinched at her words, the reality of the situation hitting him hard. I didn't think it was going to be a big deal, he muttered. I didn't think anyone would notice. Nathan's fists tightened on the desk, his knuckles turning white. And that's the problem, Liam. You didn't think. You thought you could get away with it. But not here. Not in my restaurant. Liam's head dropped, and for the first time he seemed to grasp the full weight of his actions. The excuses were gone, and all that was left was a man who had to face the reality of his prejudice. We're not done yet, Nathan said, leaning back in his chair. I want you to come back tomorrow for another meeting. And when you walk in, I expect you to think long and hard about what you've done, because this conversation isn't over. Liam looked up, his face a mix of shock and fear. Tomorrow? Yes, Nathan said, his voice final. Go home. Think about your actions. We'll decide your future here tomorrow. Without another word, Liam stood and left the room, his footsteps slow and heavy. Jade turned to Nathan, her eyes narrowing in thought. Why tomorrow? Why not just fire him now? Nathan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I want him to stew in this for a night. Let it sink in that he's not walking out of here with a slap on the wrist. It'll make it more real. Besides, there's more I want to hear from him tomorrow. He needs to come to terms with what he did, and I need him to admit it fully. Jade nodded slowly. You're giving him more chances than I would. But I trust you. If he walks in here tomorrow and still doesn't get it, he's gone, Nathan finished for her. The next morning, the atmosphere in the office was even tenser than the day before. Jade could feel it in the way the room seemed heavier, more suffocating, as they waited for Liam to arrive. She glanced at Nathan, who sat behind his desk, his face set in a grim expression. Today, there would be no more chances. Liam would either face the truth of his actions, or he would be gone. A knock came at the door, softer this time, almost hesitant. Nathan straightened in his chair, his eyes hardening. Come in, he called. Liam entered slowly, his face drawn and pale. The fear from the previous day was now etched into his features. His shoulders were slumped, and his usual arrogance had vanished entirely. He walked to the chair across from Nathan and sat down without being asked, his eyes glued to the floor. Nathan let the silence hang for a moment, giving Liam time to realize just how serious this final meeting was. Jade watched him closely, her frustration still simmering beneath the surface, but she wanted to see if Liam would finally show any real understanding. Liam, Nathan began, his voice cold but calm. You had a night to think about what happened. So let's hear it. What have you learned? Liam shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his fingers twitching as he clasped his hands in his lap. His eyes flicked up to meet Nathan's for a brief second, before looking down again. I've been thinking a lot, sir, he stammered, his voice weak. And I know I made a big mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly last night, and I— Stop, Jade interrupted, her voice firm, cutting through his half-hearted apology. This isn't about being careless or making a mistake. You deliberately treated me differently because you thought I wouldn't speak up. You thought you could get away with it. What I want to know is why. Liam flinched at her words, his face flushing red. His fingers twisted nervously in his lap, and for a moment, it looked like he was going to give another excuse. But then something shifted in his expression. His shoulders sagged, and he let out a long, shaky breath. I didn't think anyone would care, he admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought you'd just sit there and take it. Jade leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. And why did you think that? What made you think I wouldn't say anything? Liam swallowed hard, the silence in the room growing heavier with every second. He hesitated, glancing between Jade and Nathan before finally muttering, Because you're black. The words hung in the air, raw and exposed. For a moment, no one spoke. Jade's heart pounded in her chest, and she felt a mixture of anger and vindication rising within her. He had finally said it. The truth was out. Nathan's eyes darkened, and he spoke in a low, controlled voice. So you thought that because of her race, she wouldn't speak up? That she didn't deserve the same respect as the other diners? Liam nodded slowly, his face pale. I didn't think it was that big of a deal at the time, he admitted, his voice shaky. You thought wrong, Jade said sharply. You thought you could treat me like I didn't matter because you assumed no one would hold you accountable. But you were wrong. Liam's eyes filled with regret, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his head hanging low. I'm really sorry, he mumbled. I know it doesn't mean much now, but I really am. Jade sat back in her chair, crossing her arms as she studied him. You're right, she said, her voice firm. It doesn't mean much. You knew exactly what you were doing. Apologizing now won't change that. Nathan leaned forward, his expression cold and unreadable. Do you understand why this can't be forgiven, Liam? Liam nodded slowly, his face a mask of defeat. Yes, sir, I get it. Nathan stared at him for a long moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. You're fired, Liam, he said finally, his voice low but resolute. Pack up your things and don't come back. This restaurant has no place for people who treat others with disrespect and prejudice. Your actions not only hurt my wife, but also damage the reputation of this establishment. Liam's face crumpled, but he didn't argue. He knew this was the end. Slowly, he rose from the chair, his shoulders hunched, and nodded once more. I understand, sir, he mumbled. I'm really sorry. Apologies won't fix this, Nathan said quietly, his eyes hard. Now go. Without another word, Liam turned and left the office, the door clicking shut behind him. The silence that followed was heavy, but this time it wasn't filled with tension, it was filled with finality. Jade let out a slow breath, her body finally relaxing as the weight of the situation lifted off her shoulders. Liam was gone, and the restaurant was better for it. Nathan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. I wanted to give him a chance to be honest, he said softly, but I knew he wouldn't make it right. You did the right thing, Jade said, her voice gentle but firm. He needed to go. People like him don't just change overnight. Nathan nodded slowly. I know, and this place, our place, has to stand for more than that. Jade reached across the desk, taking his hand in hers. We did what we needed to do. He squeezed her hand, offering a small smile. We did. The air in the office felt lighter now, and for the first time in days, Jade felt a sense of closure. They had stood up for what was right, and Liam had faced the consequences of his actions. As they both stood to leave the office, ready to face the day ahead, Jade glanced back at the door where Liam had exited. She knew there would be more battles like this, more people like him who would try to get away with their prejudices. But she also knew that she and Nathan were ready to fight them. They walked out of the office together, side by side, ready to take on whatever came next. The day after Liam's firing was quiet. Almost too quiet for a place as bustling as Le Papillon. Jade and Nathan stood together in the empty restaurant before the lunch rush began, the soft hum of the kitchen staff preparing for the day serving as a backdrop. The air felt lighter now, though a trace of the tension from the previous days still lingered. Jade glanced at Nathan as they walked slowly through the dining area, her hand slipping into his. "Do you think he's gone for good?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. "He won't be coming back," Nathan said firmly. "I made that clear." Jade nodded, knowing that Liam's chapter at the restaurant was well and truly closed. But a lingering thought sat at the back of her mind, one she had yet to voice. "You know," she began, "I kept thinking last night, if Liam had such a problem with black people, why did he even work for you in the first place?" Nathan raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I've wondered the same thing. It's funny how people like him think they can hide behind a job, a uniform, and their own twisted logic. But eventually, the truth always comes out." Jade sighed, a mixture of frustration and disbelief washing over her. "It's so absurd. He's working for a black man, someone who built this place from the ground up, and yet he has the audacity to think he can treat someone like me, like us, as if we don't belong. The hypocrisy is unbelievable." Nathan shook his head, his expression turning serious again. "It's the way people like him justify their actions. They think they can compartmentalize their hatred, hide it behind a paycheck or a title. But at the end of the day, it always comes down to fear. Fear of losing power, fear of change, fear of seeing people they don't respect succeed." Jade leaned against one of the polished tables, her fingers tracing the edge of the silverware set out for the day's guests. "I still can't believe it. The nerve of someone like that working in a place built by a black owner, thinking he could look down on me." Nathan smiled softly. "He won't be the last, unfortunately. But at least here, we've set the standard. People like him won't last in our world." Jade felt a surge of pride as she looked around the restaurant. It was more than just a business. It was a place that stood for something. Something bigger than either of them individually. Nathan had built it from nothing, and together, they had made it a success. A place that welcomed everyone with respect and dignity, no matter who they were. She straightened up, feeling the weight of the past few days finally lift. "You're right," she said quietly. "This place isn't just a restaurant, it's a statement." Nathan nodded, his eyes soft as he looked at her. "It always has been." They stood in silence for a moment, letting the truth of those words settle between them. The restaurant was more than just a business venture or a source of income. It was a space where people of all backgrounds, races, and identities came together, a reflection of the world they wanted to see. And anyone who couldn't respect that didn't belong here. As the staff began to file in, preparing for the lunch crowd, Nathan took Jade's hand and led her toward the back, where they could enjoy a quiet moment before the busy day began. They passed through the kitchen, where the chefs greeted them with warm smiles, and out into the small courtyard behind the building. The sun was warm on Jade's skin, and she closed her eyes for a moment, letting the light and fresh air wash away the remnants of the stress from the past few days. It felt good to breathe, to stand in a place where they both belonged. "I'm proud of what we did," she said after a moment, turning to Nathan. "We stood up for what was right, and we did it together." Nathan smiled, his hand squeezing hers. "Always." They stood there in the quiet of the courtyard, side by side, knowing that while the world outside wasn't perfect, they had carved out a small space that reflected the values they held dear. The restaurant would continue, stronger and more resilient for what had happened. And as they moved forward, they would continue to fight for the respect and dignity of everyone who walked through those doors. No more racists like Liam. No more silent discrimination. Only people who understood the simple truth that in Le Papillon, everyone belonged.